So to get it started, best way to find the center point of any rectangle is to match up the corners, draw lines through the center, and you find that little center X right there. Next, I am using an 1 3/8 Forstner bit so that I can have a pass-through for the collet and the bit.
What the hell?
So here I use the existing base on the router to mark where the screw holes are supposed to go. Now we just need to find some screws in the old storage tub that will actually fit in the holes. Now that I've found the correct size, I just am marking to see the depth that I need to cut them to. So what you're seeing me do here is a trick I learned actually from another YouTuber called DIY Perks. I put a nut on the bolt so that when I cut it and the threads get all marred from the cutting, I can use the bolt to straighten back out those threads as I twist the bolt back and forth, like I'm doing right here. Since I had already drilled a pilot hole to make sure that these screws would work, I had to widen the hole with a drill bit first, and then I went back after with a Forstner bit to flatten out the base of the hole. So you can see here I had traced around the plexiglass, measured in 1 inch so that I could route out where the plexi would actually sit. But first I had to cut out that centerpiece, started with drilling 4 holes and using my jigsaw to connect the dots. You can see here at one time I was going to use this as a Punisher head template for American flags that I make. So here's where I started routing out where I'm going to place the plexiglass. You can see on the left and the right hand sides that I placed a fence so that I had something to index against so I didn't go too far. And the front and the back I just freehanded. I probably could have put something there, but I don't know, I was just being lazy. Of course, if you've ever used a router, you know how messy they can be, so every time I had to clean up in between each section that I routed out. Here's where I had to square up the edges so that the piece of plexiglass could fit properly in there without much movement. With routers, you don't want to hog out too much, so I ended up doing this process 2 more times to make sure that I got the correct depth of the plexiglass. So here's where I'm starting the process of making the base for the router table. This portion is actually going to be a little storage cabinet where I can keep router bits, any screws that are needed, etc. So this is the carcass of that little storage cabinet. You can see I have a little bit of an overhang on the bottom there, so I'm using that so that I can actually clamp the router table to my workbench if needed. This is a shout out to a couple different YouTubers. This crosscut sled is a mixture of something from Jonathan Katz Moses and Fix This, Build That. Getting into the assembly of the carcass, I'm gluing and brad nailing everything together. Again, this doesn't need to be a perfect base. I'm just looking for something that will be functional as needed. As you can see here, I've installed a front and a back support to this cabinet carcass. Also, as you can see, I have spacers sitting on the bottom of the cabinet, and I am attaching a drawer glide so that with the drawers, I don't have to actually purchase any drawer slides. I can just have the drawers glide on these two pieces that I am installing in the cabinet. So if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you've watched various YouTube videos on how to assemble drawer components. And as you can see, I've cut a dado into the sides and the back to accept the drawer bottom. Here's the cabinet completed. I took some extra 3/4 plywood to make the faces of these drawers and just some large screws as the pulls. Here's the support on the right side of the router table. I've put a little decorative taper on the legs. And as you can see, again, with the cabinet, I had made a little bit of an extra lip. So if I need to clamp it down to my workbench, I can. Here you can see I've cut all the router table fence components. I have the base, the face, and some supports to make sure that it stays at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to end up putting 2 of those supports right on each side of the hole where the router bit will come through, and then end up covering it with an extra piece of plywood that I will cut a hole in for dust collection. And then on the left and the right, I will actually inset those supports a little bit again to clamp it to the router table. So this is just another trick that I've kind of picked up. I'm sure I saw it on a YouTube video somewhere. But when you have those belt sanders and a piece of it rips off when you're going at it pretty hard, keep those little pieces so that you can sand more easily through holes, around corners, etc. as needed. And here's the finished product. Not too shabby if I do say so myself. You can see as I am panning around, I ended up using some pocket holes and screws to create additional support and rigidity with that piece on the front and the back, so the work surface itself doesn't bow. The cabinet operates fairly freely. Again, not perfection here. I would just clamp down my fence. As I mentioned before, I traced out and cut a hole for my vacuum to alleviate any dust as best I could. If you stuck it out to the end now, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Hopefully, I gave you a couple woodworking tips and suggestions that will help you out. That's why I watch all the YouTube channels that I do, is things that make your life a little easier as a woodworker. So thank you so much, and make sure you hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next time.